death of an evidence keeper, the Attica Prison Retaliation. The screams echoed through the cold concrete halls of Attica Prison. Smoke, blood, and chaos filled the air as guards stormed in, firing into crowds of terrified inmates. The year was 1971, and the uprising that started as a demand for better living conditions had turned into one of the deadliest prison confrontations in U.S. history. When the gunfire finally stopped, 43 people were dead, both prisoners and hostages. The official story said the inmates had killed the guards, but the truth was far darker. Years later, deep in the prison archives, one man held the missing pieces of that truth. His name was Leonard Harris, a former inmate who had survived the Attica riot. Hidden in his small, dimly lit apartment in upstate New York, he pulled out a notebook covered in old stains and cracked leather. Inside were the names, dates, and secret notes he had written in the years following the riot, records of what he saw and what others had confessed to him, that it wasn't just prisoners who died from inmate attacks. Many of the hostages had been shot by law enforcement during the retaking, and officials had covered it up. Now, decades later, Leonard was ready to speak. He had been called to testify in a long-awaited civil case against the state, one that could finally expose what really happened at Attica. But that night, as he placed his notebook into a worn envelope labeled evidence, he felt something strange, a quiet fear creeping up his spine. His phone had been ringing for days, but every time he picked up, the line went dead. Outside, a car engine idled for too long beneath his window. Leonard didn't know it yet, but someone else knew about that notebook, someone who had been waiting for years to make sure those secrets never saw daylight. To understand why Leonard was in danger, we have to go back to where it all began. In September 1971, the men inside Attica Correctional Facility had reached their breaking point. The prison was overcrowded, filthy, and run with an iron fist. Prisoners were allowed one roll of toilet paper per month, one shower per week, and had to live under constant verbal and physical abuse. Most of them were black or Hispanic, while nearly all guards were white, creating deep racial tension. On September 9, 1971, that tension finally exploded. Over 1,200 inmates took control of a section of the prison known as D-Yard, capturing guards as hostages. They demanded better food, fair treatment, medical care, and basic human rights. For 4 days, they held the yard, speaking through bullhorns and negotiating with state officials. Journalists, lawyers, and even civil rights observers were allowed in. But behind the cameras, fear and mistrust were growing. The state wanted control back, and fast. On the morning of September 13th, helicopters flew over the prison, the air filled with tear gas, and then with bullets. Troopers and correctional officers fired hundreds of rounds in a storm of chaos. Inmates ran, crawled, and screamed. Some threw themselves to the ground, others shielded the hostages. In minutes, the yard turned into a war zone. When the overflow was over, dozens lay dead or dying. The official statement that day claimed the prisoners had killed the hostages by slitting their throats. Newspapers printed it nationwide, but when autopsies were done, the truth shocked everyone. Every hostage had been killed by gunfire, and only one side had the guns: law enforcement.
The state quickly buried the reports. Files disappeared, photos went missing, whistleblowers were silenced. But inside the chaos, Leonard had seen it all. He saw who fired, who gave the order, and how the aftermath was rewritten to protect the powerful. He wrote it down, not realizing that one day, those pages would make him a target. Decades later, survivors and families of the victims pushed for answers. Lawsuits dragged on for years, and evidence kept resurfacing. When Leonard's name appeared on a new list of witnesses, he finally decided to come forward with his notes, the ones he had hidden for over 40 years. That was when strange things began happening. His mailbox was pried open. He found footprints under his kitchen window. One morning, his door handle was covered in a greasy black substance. The local police said it was probably nothing, but Leonard knew better. He had carried a secret too long, one that powerful people never wanted spoken out loud. On a cold October night, Leonard placed his notebook on the kitchen table, turned off the lights, and locked his door. Outside, the same car engine hummed softly under the yellow streetlight. Inside, the ticking clock sounded louder than ever. Then, a single sharp knock at the door. Leonard froze. Another knock, harder this time. He reached for the phone, but before he could dial, the line went dead. The next morning, police found Leonard Harris slumped in his chair. His apartment was spotless, no signs of a struggle, but the notebook, the one labeled evidence, was gone. The news broke quietly, too quietly for something that should have shaken the entire state. Elderly man found dead in his apartment, foul play not suspected. That was the headline buried halfway down the local paper. No mention of who Leonard Harris really was. No mention of his connection to the upcoming Attica testimony. No mention of the missing notebook. But to those who knew him, the old prisoners' rights group, the lawyers and the families who'd been fighting for justice since 1971, Leonard's death didn't look like an accident. It looked like a message. One of the lawyers, Patricia O'Donnell, had been in touch with Leonard for months. He had promised to hand her copies of his notes before the court hearing. When she couldn't reach him for days, she drove to his apartment herself. The police were already there. They said he'd suffered a heart attack, but Patricia noticed things they hadn't or didn't care to. His desk was too clean, his file cabinet was empty, and on the floor near the window, there was a small, round burn mark, as if something hot had been pressed there recently. "Where's the notebook?" she asked. One of the officers shrugged. "We didn't find anything like that." But Patricia knew Leonard had hidden it well. He'd told him once, "If anything ever happens to me, the truth is already in motion." She didn't know what he meant at the time, but now those words chilled her.
The days after Leonard's death were full of whispers. Former inmates who had been planning to testify suddenly backed out. 2 of them moved away and refused to answer calls. People who'd worked at Attica in 1971 said they'd seen strange men hanging around their houses, claiming to be from the Archives Division. Even inside state offices, nervous talk spread. Decades had passed since the riot, but the cover-up still had roots deep inside the system. Some of the officers who had ordered the original assault were dead, but others were alive, retired, respected, living quiet lives under the protection of silence, and Leonard's evidence threatened to drag all of that into the open. Meanwhile, Patricia kept digging. She searched old storage units, talked to Leonard's few surviving friends, and finally visited an old cellmate named Reggie Mason in Buffalo. Reggie was one of the few still alive who had been with Leonard during the Attica siege. When Patricia showed up at his small apartment, he already seemed to know why she'd come. "They got him, didn't they?" Reggie said softly, his eyes full of fear. "Who?" Patricia asked. "The same people who got the truth buried the first time. You think this system forgets?" He told her something Leonard had done right after the riot, something she had never heard before. Back in 1971, Leonard had taken part in cleanup duty after the massacre. While scrubbing blood off the D-yard floor, he found something half hidden in the mud, a roll of undeveloped film. He never told anyone what was on it, but he kept it all these years. "Said it showed the truth," Reggie whispered. "Said it showed who really fired first." Patricia's heart raced. If that film still existed, it could blow the whole case open.
Back at the State Archives, Patricia demanded access to the original Attica investigation files. Most of them had been marked classified for decades, but she managed to get temporary clearance. She opened one dusty box and found old reports, yellowed papers describing the retaking procedure. Buried inside was a log entry dated October 3, 1971, 2 weeks after the riot, noting that evidence film reels from D-Yard were transferred to a private security office in Albany. That office no longer existed. It had shut down years ago. But there was a name signed at the bottom of the page: Captain Robert Halley.
Halley had been the tactical commander during the retaking of Attica. He was retired now, living quietly on a farm upstate. The same man who'd once ordered his men to retake the yard by any means necessary. Patricia felt a chill. Was it possible that Leonard's mysterious film was part of that missing evidence? And could Halley still be protecting it? Or worse, destroying anyone connected to it? She left the archives and drove straight to Halley's address. The house sat back from the road, surrounded by trees. An old pickup was parked outside. When she knocked, there was no answer. She was about to leave when she noticed a small motion sensor camera hidden near the porch light. Someone was definitely watching. Patricia turned back toward her car. Then she heard it, the sound of footsteps behind her. A man in a dark jacket stood by her door, blocking the way. His voice was low. "You need to stop asking about Attica. People died then, and more will die if you keep stirring it up." Before she could respond, he slipped something into her hand, a folded piece of paper, and walked off toward the woods. Patricia unfolded the paper. On paper, written in faded pencil, were 3 words: "Check the locker." At the bottom was a number 117, East Ridge Bus Terminal. Patricia's pulse quickened. A storage locker. Maybe Leonard's final move, the motion he'd mentioned before his death. That night, she drove to the old bus terminal. The building was nearly empty, just a few flickering lights and the hum of vending machines. Locker number 117 was dented and rusted, but the keyhole was intact. She hesitated for a moment, looking around. Then she turned the key. Inside was a small metal box wrapped in brown paper. When she opened it, her hands began to shake. Inside were rolls of undeveloped 35mm film, and on top of them, Leonard's handwriting. "If you're reading this, it means they found me. Don't let them bury it again." Patricia closed the box and took a deep breath. She didn't know who they were, but she knew one thing for sure. The truth of Attica wasn't dead yet. She looked up at the dark terminal window. Someone was standing outside, watching her. Patricia didn't move. The figure outside the window stood still, motionless, like a shadow that had taken shape. Her pulse thumped in her ears. Then, slowly, the person outside stepped forward into the dim light of the bus terminal sign. It wasn't a stranger. It was Reggie Mason, Leonard's old cellmate.
He raised his hand slightly, trying to calm her. "Don't be scared. I followed you," he said in a rough whisper. "You shouldn't be alone with that evidence. They're watching you." Patricia's first instinct was to run, but something in his voice stopped her. It wasn't fear, it was desperation. "Reggie, how did you find me?" she asked. "I didn't," he said. "They did. I heard them talking. I came to warn you. They know about the locker." Before Patricia could answer, a loud thud echoed from the far end of the terminal. The metal door near the loading dock rattled. Reggie's eyes widened. "We gotta go, now." They ran out the side exit and into the parking lot. The night was cold, their breath visible under the flickering streetlights. Patricia clutched the small metal box to her chest as if it were life itself. A black SUV turned the corner and slowed down near the exit. Its headlights swept across them like a searchlight. "Go! Go!"
Reggie hissed. They ducked behind a row of old vending machines and then sprinted toward Patricia's car. Tires screeched behind them. Someone shouted, "Stop! Drop the bag!" But Patricia didn't stop. She jumped into the driver's seat. Reggie dove in beside her, and they sped off into the night. They drove for hours through empty country roads, only stopping when the SUV's lights disappeared in the distance. Patricia parked under an abandoned bridge and finally took a deep breath. The silence was heavy. The sound of crickets felt too normal for what they'd just escaped. Reggie looked at her. "You got no idea what you're holding, do you?" She shook her head. "All I know is it's the truth Leonard died for." Reggie nodded. "Then you better be ready. That film, it's not just proof of who fired. It shows faces, names, officers who ordered the shooting, even one politician who was there that day, off the record." Patricia stared at him. "You've seen it?" "Once," he said quietly. "Long time ago. Leonard trusted me, but I told him to hide it. I never thought he'd keep it this long." Patricia looked down at the metal box. The weight of it suddenly felt unbearable. It wasn't just film. It was 40 years of lies, buried bodies, and broken promises. "We can take it to the press, or to the court. We can end this." Reggie sighed. "You don't get it. People have tried before. They always disappear or end up dead. You think this system gonna let some old pictures ruin them?" Patricia tightened her grip on the box. "Then maybe this time it's different." At dawn, they reached a small news station outside Albany. Patricia knew one reporter she trusted, Sarah Quinn, who had covered the Attica lawsuits for years. When Sarah saw the box, she went pale. "Please tell me this isn't what I think it is," she said. Patricia opened it. The 3 rolls of film were still there, neatly labeled, D-Yard 1971, Roll 1, Roll 2, Roll 3. Sarah hesitated only a moment before saying, "Follow me." In the photo lab, the chemicals smelled sharp and sterile. As the negatives appeared under the red light, Patricia and Reggie leaned in close. What they saw made their stomachs twist. It was all there. Soldiers aiming down into the yard, unarmed prisoners on their knees, and hostages waving white flags before the shots were fired. The final frame showed something worse. Men in uniform standing over bodies, smiling. Reggie turned away. "Now you see why they killed him," he whispered. Sarah stared at the prints in disbelief. "If this goes public, it'll change everything. The whole state will have to answer." Patricia nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "That's exactly why it has to." 2 days later, the photos hit the national news. Headlines exploded across every network. New evidence reveals cover-up in 1971 Attica massacre. Secret film links law enforcement to prison deaths. The governor ordered an immediate inquiry. Old officials were called out of retirement. For the first time in decades, families of the dead heard the truth spoken aloud. But victory came with a price. That same night, as Patricia drove home, she noticed a car following her in the rearview mirror. It kept its distance, but never turned away. She pulled into her driveway, heart pounding, and waited. The car stopped across the street, engine running, lights off. She didn't move. Then her phone buzzed. One new message, no name, no number, just 6 words. "You finished what he couldn't. Be careful." Patricia looked back at the car. Its headlights flashed once, then it drove away into the darkness. She stood there, shaking, clutching the phone, realizing that even though the truth was finally out, some shadows never leave. The Attica story had been reopened, but the cost was written in blood. Leonard Harris, the man they called the evidence keeper, had died to bring the truth to light. And now, because of him, the world finally knew what really happened behind those prison walls. The story of Leonard Harris reminds us that sometimes truth doesn't die. It just waits for the right hands to reveal it. From the blood-stained yard of Attica to the silence of a small apartment decades later, justice moved slowly, but it never stopped. If this story opened your eyes to the hidden side of America's prisons, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share, because every voice helps keep stories like this alive. This was Death of an Evidence Keeper, the Attica Prison Retaliation. Until next time, stay aware, stay safe, and never stop asking questions.